If you want this podcast free of ads, follow us now on patreon.com/David McWilliams.
What in the world is happening on Wall Street?
Economic indicators.
Who knows where this is going to end up?
To understand the economy, you have to understand human nature.
This podcast is powered by Acast.
How are you doing there? It is podcast time. How are you, man?
I'm very good. The course is doing a storm.
The course is doing, yes. So thank you all very much, all those who joined me on Patreon to learn economics. Our new course is International Trade and Money. It's a sort of a brand new course, not unlike the course I give in Trinity, on what I would call the funky world of international trade. So what we're doing is we're moving, this course is bringing us towards crypto, but it's the whole history of money, where it came from, how it changed the world, etc. And one of the great things is to look at the myths. But this one is on the myth of barter. Do you know the barter, right? Barter's really hilarious, John. You know the economists say, oh yes, well, clearly the world started with barter.
Day, I'd swap you a goat for a pound of sugar.
Exactly, right. A goat for a pound of sugar. Economists have always maintained that this is how the commercial stroke monetary world started. There's no evidence.
Really? Nothing at all?
Nothing. There's no evidence that humans were terrorized by the notion of the mutual coincidence of want. So mutually, you need something at one time, I need something at one time. We trade. Never happened, right? It's a foundational myth in economics.
Yeah.
And it's because of economists' extraordinary weakness for ridiculous assumptions. So when they were trying to explain the monetary economy, they said, oh, well, let's assume that there was a barter and then there was a great leap of technological innovation to a financial economy.
Well, there's a certain amount of sense in barter. You can imagine that it would work. But as you say, like...
There's no evidence. So if you talk to archaeologists, right, anthropologists, who are looking at various different, for example, very primitive tribes now, those that are still left, to try and get a sense of how we lived as hunter-gatherers. You know, all that stuff done not that long ago in Papua New Guinea, right? Yeah. How do these people live? And do they tell us about how we lived thousands of years ago? One of the amazing things is there's no evidence of barter. What there is evidence is trade. There's evidence of, blockchain. The crypto guys keep going on about it. There's evidence of very, very, very primitive blockchain. So basically, over the course of a year, you and I would trade together, our tribe and your tribe, right? And then at the end, you'd have like a ledger, like a blockchain.
Yeah.
You say, okay, man, you owe me all this stuff. You say, okay, fair enough, and we pay up. So trade went not frictionless, but rather without friction until such a time as there became a payment day. So the idea that your tribe would rock up to us and say, listen, I'm starving, I need some food, but I can only give you a spear. And your lot saying, nah, don't want a spear today.
Loads of spears.
We're full on with spears. We're long of spears, right? And you guys starved to death. It just never happened.
Yeah.
And it's kind of the essential silliness of mainstream economics. So this particular lecture it's lecture 3 in a 14 lecture course, is on the myth of barter. And again, if you want to learn economics with me, if you want to look at the notes, if you want to look at the reading list, if you want to really delve in to what I would call practical, common sense, everyday economics, join us on Patreon at patreon.com/David McWilliams. Take this course or take the last course, which again was another 10 lecture course on macroeconomics. That was up a little while ago. Have a look at that. Have a look at the new course. And you know what? Just learn economics into the last couple of weeks of 2021 and into the first couple of weeks of 2022. And you know, the great thing is, it's far better to learn together than alone. So let's learn economics together.
Mac, on last week's podcast, we talked a lot about the Fed and inflation.
We did, yes.
And what they might and might not do and what that might and might not mean and all that kind of stuff. So this week we said we
promised, which is always a dangerous thing to do.
Yeah, it is. But we promised, and we're going to deliver.
Unusually. Unprecedentedly, actually.
Yeah. So we're going to go to the States and we're going to talk to Rob Armstrong.
Yeah, we're going to talk to Rob Armstrong because this is the issue that is spooking financial markets. And although sometimes financial markets seem really remote and it always appears like somebody else's business. Bizarrely, what does happen in financial markets percolates down very, very quickly to everyday wages, house prices, job opportunities, optimism, etc. So let's go to New York and let's talk to Rob. How are you, Rob?
Not bad. What about you?
I'm good. Is that a new beard since the last time we saw you?
I don't know. I think maybe it's gotten a little longer or something, or grayer.
There's a sort of a pensive Ben Bernanke thing going on there.
Come on, man. Oh, you're killing me with that.
You could give us a lecture on, monetary policy in the Great Depression.
There is one line by Ben Bernanke that I always quote, which is, at one point, somebody basically asked him, how does this QE thing really work? Some question to that effect. And he said, we're learning by doing.
Oh, that really fills me with a huge amount of confidence.
So whenever I don't know what I'm doing and somebody asks me what I'm doing, I say, I'm like Ben Bernanke. I'm learning by doing.
Yeah, I'm going to quote the great Ben Bernanke, and I'm going to hide behind that particular... So how is the States? How is everything? I see Biden is losing.
Biden is not very popular.
Yeah, what's going on there?
I mean, I think, I'm not no political expert, but it seems to me we have a tradition of not liking our newly elected presidents, that the honeymoon ends quite quickly here. And it's very traditional for the party that has just won the White House to get beat up a little bit in the elections that immediately follow.
It's extraordinary for a country that's so fond of a prenup, which you really are.
The honeymoon.
Yeah, you might say, hold on a second. You can elect me here, right? But the prenup is you got to love me for at least... You can't leave me straight away. You got to love me for at least a year, but that's not the case.
And I don't know, how mad are people about how things ended in Afghanistan? I don't really know. How much are people feeling inflation? I mean, somebody once said to me, and I think this was smart, when you ask the person on the street, how's the economy? They answer according to two questions. One, have you or anyone you know been fired? And right now they're answering no to that. There's plenty of jobs. But you're also asking them, what's the price of gas? And the price of gas is up. And for Americans, that really matters. We drive a lot. So honeymoon over, embarrassing situation in Afghanistan, price of gas up.
Equals
we don't like the president.
And we're going to vote in mates of the last guy.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's about as the most sophisticated political analysis I'm capable of giving.
Well, it's probably the most sophisticated political analysis this podcast has ever imparted on the world. In fact, John and I are actually, just if you could see us, we're lying down. We're absorbing that piece, that pearl of wisdom, this sort of, Churchillian sweep of political analysis.
I mean, if you ask an Irish person, how's the economy? What do they start thinking about?
I think that
price of houses,
definitely price of houses.
Yeah.
And it's a very strange thing because, and this is where economics is kind of pathetically uninstructive to people, because GDP goes up as the price of houses go up, but the people's perceptions of economic health goes down as prices of houses go up. So you have this inverse relationship between, GDP, effervescence, and the whole thing. I think Irish people would definitely look at the price of houses.
Yeah.
And I think
but
historically,
don't the people
tax
who own the
too.
houses feel great?
Yeah, but they don't.
If the price of houses is going up, it just matters if you're renting or owning.
No, the people who own the houses never say it. Are you what she's noticed?
Yeah.
They disappear in all survey data. It's like, I'm okay. It's fine. They don't, because it's like anything, is that if things are going well, you shrug your shoulders. When things are going badly, you shout about it. So I think there's an asymmetry there. The other thing I think Irish people are sensitive to are certainly a certain generation, the generation older than John and I, which means there's only about 4 of them left in the whole country.
The centenarians.
Exactly. Is they worry about tax. There is a long historical anti-tax movement here, which was embedded in the 1980s when the tax rates, particularly the income tax rates, were extremely high. I bet you your cousins and your in-laws down in Skibbereen and down that neck of the woods, when you talk to them, that's another thing they'll go on about, which is the taxes. So what interests me, there's always a party here, usually a party, the centre-right, that will traditionally try and campaign on modestly low marginal income tax as their ultimate electoral promise. And I'm not too sure if that actually translates down to the millennials and the Gen Zs anymore. I'm not too sure that they're that upset about that. In fact, many of them would say we pay a little bit more tax for cheaper houses if you can build them cheaper for us, if you can build social houses. But that, Rob, it's
a really interesting question, because that's in America, that's, the generation of people in the center or on the right who are old enough to remember Reagan. I mean, this is what the Republican Party used to be for, was lower taxes.
Yes.
Like, if it wasn't bringing your taxes down, what was the point of the whole thing? Maybe we'd beat the Russians or something, and that would help a little bit too. But it was, that was what they were for, was bringing your taxes down. And I don't know people who are 30 now. I don't know if they have that same obsession. I think that's probably a good question for America.
No, I don't think they do. I look at it in Ireland, and I think that your millennials are not head up about taxes in the same way as the older folk, because the ideology has shifted. The ideology has shifted in Ireland and all around the world. The ideology isn't really left or right or rich or poor or urban or rural. It's kind of insiders and outsiders. And when you are, you can be an insider on the left or the right. That's the interesting thing. But when you're on the outside, you're on the outside. So I think that's a lot of our politics is migrating towards your politics, which may well end up in this strange soup of culture wars, hopefully not here in the same way as has. So let's talk about the markets, the economy. Let's do our stuff. So what's rocking your world over there and the world of finance?
For today, I think this is a story that you and your listeners might appreciate. I wrote about this thing called Zillow.
Oh, what's that?
That you might not know about in America. So Zillow is the dominant website on which people look at houses. And, it's a listing site. And it was most famous because for basically every property, you could think of the address. It would give you a price estimate on it. So you could kind of look up your own house and it would give you a price estimate. And it also had listings of all the houses that were actually for sale. And you could go look, and it sort of consolidated that space. And it made money basically by providing leads to estate agents, to real estate brokers. And about 3 years ago, Zillow said, actually, we have so much data and so much insight from running our website and doing some businesses associated with it, that what we're going to start doing is actually buying and selling houses. And we're going to provide people who want to sell with a faster, more certain experience. We're going to give them a very quick offer on the price of their house. We're going to get them out of there. We'll take it into our inventory. We'll sell it. We'll get you going. It'll all be, you won't have to have people traipsing through your house. And yesterday, they announced, after 3 or 4 years of trying this and talking about what a great business is, that actually the price of houses was quite volatile. And maybe they better get out of this business. I don't have to tell an Irish audience that if you take your eye off the real estate market, it will hand you your ass. But
you're absolutely right. And it's also that migration from broker to principal is usually a dodgy one.
A dodgy one. And even that, a migration from the frictionless world of the internet to meat world, the world of actual houses that cost things and you have to hold an inventory and that have carrying costs, and maybe you have to renovate them. And the reason I think this is an important story is not because Zillow is the most important business in the world. It's because it's an interesting example of a couple of things, one of which you just mentioned, the move from agent to principal, the move from the internet to the real world, and just the idea that it is so common out there now that big data is going to be transformative for everyone. And the one who has the best data is going to be able to, as it were, beat the market. And Zillow did have better data than everyone else. They did have their eyes on this market, but it still proved to be too hard. And it wasn't a huge shift in the real estate market that ended up blowing them out. Prices had been going batty, and they cooled a little on a national level in August and September. And that was enough to suddenly leave this company with a $500 million loss on inventory they'd paid too much
Wow.
for.
Well, you know what I would say, Rob? I would say
Mm.
that it's not big data in housing markets that should define your accuracy or your edge. It's actually big vocab to describe emotional states of the human being. So if you start
Yes.
with optimism, then you can go to exhilaration, then you can go to
Yes.
confidence, then you can go to euphoria. That data set is a much more accurate set of looking at the way
Of course.
housing markets go up and down and up and down. But what I'm interested in is, even in a bull market for housing, a company
Yes.
like this can lose money.
Yeah. And, you can look at the chart. I mean, the home prices on the national level, went from the mean existing home sale price. I'm going to get the number slightly wrong, but it was something on the order of 350,000 in July. And in September, it was 330 or 340 or something. So it turned down. But I think one thing about this is, what markets are you in really matters. So who knows what micro market they were in? Somebody in the office said, geez, this is like that Bear Stearns hedge fund. And what they were referring to readers who don't know, is the sort of first shot that was fired in 2008 was everything seemed to be going great. And then this little hedge fund that was financed by Bear Stearns went under. And it was like, I wonder what they were up to. Do you remember this? There was a couple of these funds at the very beginning.
They happened in August of 2007. And I know this.
And everything was cool, right?
And everything was hunky-dory. And in fact, the man whose name we didn't besmirch, but clearly complimented at the top, Ben Bernanke, said, don't worry, guys, everything's cool. I've got this.
Everything's cool.
Right?
So I don't know I don't know my colleague is right, but we have even beyond the housing market, we're at a moment right now where we've been ascending that staircase of emotions that you've been talking about. And we can talk about meme stocks or Bitcoin, stocks in general, house prices. And, one of the questions that's on people's minds is, when do we go from the top of the emotional staircase to the slide down the other side? It's a mug's game to try to guess when that's going to happen. But I can tell you that this is a question that is on the market's mind.
So when you're talking to Wall Street players, not just real estate buyers, but when you're talking to everybody, is there a sense in the States that something is afoot? That the idea that interest rates will stay lower for longer might not necessarily be a great bet, that there is this effervescence in certain markets, that, as you said, Zillow, this company that we thought had the best data, and also we probably thought had kind of the best balance sheet, transpires to have a very fragile balance sheet, like a hedge fund. Is that what you're kind of...
I mean, the great argument, so stocks by traditional metrics, for example, as houses do, and a lot of other assets do, look very expensive. And the question, and I think we talked about this term when I spoke to you last, is the question is TINA. And you know what TINA stands for, which is there is no alternative, which means in a world where bonds are yielding plus or minus nothing, and international stocks you don't want to get involved with, and goodness knows what's going on with China. Yeah, stocks are expensive, but what else are you going to do? Right? You got to own something.
You got to own something.
Right?
I remember.
So the earnings yield on stocks is still significantly higher than the yield you get on bonds. So what are you going to do? You're going to buy bonds? You're going to sit there in cash? I think that's the debate that has been on Wall Street's mind now for even a year or two.
Now, imagine you take that mindset, that TINA mindset. I always remember Mrs. Thatcher was very fond of TINA when it came to the miners' strike, when it came to the Falklands. Her default position was always, there is no alternative. But take TINA, because TINA is a state of mind rather than a financial set of numbers. And add into TINA a central bank that gets spooked possibly by early doors inflation and says, we may well have to at least bake in higher rates of interest looking at the next 2 or 3 years than we thought otherwise was the case. What happens to Tina in that environment where the cost of finance becomes materially higher? Because
So
when things
you're talking about, so if inflation really gets going, then the Tina argument falls apart, right? Because nominal bond yields go up first.
Yep.
Right. So the price of just living gets expensive. The price of food and fuel and everything else gets expensive. Nominal bond yields go up first, which means you still might have negative real rates, but eventually, or at least traditionally, eventually real bond yields, in other words, bond yields minus the rate of inflation, turn positive again, because investors want to be compensated for future inflation risk, not just the inflation risk they see now. So they want to build in positive returns to their bond returns, real returns. And then then you said, well, maybe it's not so bad to own a bond all of a sudden. And the Tina story falls apart. So then you are off into the debate about inflation and central banks and how this is going to go. And are we seeing one step function change in prices, or are we getting into a cycle of raising prices?
And what's your sense, Rob?
Oh, I mean, my sense is I wish someone smarter than I would just tell me the answer to that one. I mean, so the argument for it's just going to that we're obviously there's inflation now. There's no argument about that we have, a lot of prices are up. The argument, I guess, that it's going to be a one-timer is that it's driven by supply problems that we've all heard a lot about, and that those won't go on forever. And, we know it's feeding through to wages, but so everything will take a one-time jump up of whatever single digit percent, and then we'll be done when the supply problems subside. I don't see why that can't be, why that has to be wrong.
That's more or less the Fed's argument. That's more or less the Federal Reserve's argument.
It's the Fed's argument. And I think you and I are close to the same age. And, we were all, when we were very naughty and our parents wanted to scare us, they would talk about wage price cycles. And then we would go hide under the bed because the big wage price cycle was going to come get us. But I think, there's the 70s and everything like that. But maybe we don't have a cycle, in which case
it just goes away. You stay under the bed. You stay under the bed a long way, and it goes away.
You stay, and then it goes away. But there's definitely economists out there, especially older economists, who are still worried about it. So, Larry Summers, our former Treasury Secretary and former president of Harvard, is storming around the internet telling anybody who will listen, the Fed is way behind the curve, and this is dangerous, and we're going to have a real problem here. So, and I'm quite certain Summers is smarter than I am. So I'm not going to discount his argument either.
Well, what is interesting is the way in which each generation, we'll conclude here, but it's interesting that basically a lot of intellectual thought is fashion.
Yes.
It's a bit like flares versus drain pipes.
Correct.
It's a bit mods versus rockers. It's either Led Zeppelin or folk or punk versus, So what your suite of beliefs become quite embedded in your sense of yourself. Yes. And that's very prevalent in economics.
And right now, I think there's a lot of young economists or, and financial journalists who see in the argument about central bank monetary policy an embedded argument about economic equality. And they say the Fed should push harder on the employment mandate, the full employment mandate, than the price stability mandate. Because the Fed needs to be thinking about we have a terribly unequal world. And if the labor market runs really hot and workers can demand a little more all of a sudden, good.
Yeah, exactly.
We've been waiting around for that. Let's have more of that. And again, I'm just the journalist here. It's hard for these are serious economic questions that I don't feel comfortable concluding, but that's where the debate is at.
On the basis that if we conclude this, you and I have no jobs, so you can't be concluding these discussions.
Okay.
we have a vested interest.
Keep going.
Exactly.
Let's just muddy the water as
muddy
much
the water.
as we can.
Poor old John is sitting over here thinking, what are these guys? John, you were...
Rob, I just wanted to ask you, just what is the view in America, the punters' view in America of COP26, or does that figure in the conversation at all?
Well, I mean, I can't give you a sort of man on the street or culture-wide view on that. I live in the New York City bubble. It's a liberal bubble, and it's journalists and so forth. And I don't think it's because there's so much going on. It hasn't been terribly top of mind with the people that I talked to. It's on the agenda, but not at the top.
Right.
How's that?
Yeah. Yeah, that actually makes an awful lot of sense.
Sufficiently evasive to get a job in the Financial Times.
On the one hand.
Yes, exactly. Well, hold on a second. I just have to go to the loo and then I'll think about that and I'll be back. But Rob, just before we go, on the issue, there's like two old cynics here. On the issue of the generational shift, we do know one thing about generational shifts is you should typically be on the side of younger people because progress happens one funeral at a time. Now, in economics, does that mean that we're going into this new world of higher wages? I mean, it's, higher wage inflation might be wage inflation to one person and economic justice to another. And if it's wage inflation to the over 50s and economic justice to the under 40s, well, then you know which way the world is going.
I think this discussion, at least in the circles that I travel in, which are admittedly rather nerdy, this is a debate about MMT, modern monetary theory. And there's a lot of those under 40s who say all our life we've been sold this line that the government can only spend what it brings in taxes. And, we always have to be austere and careful. And by God, the fact is, in America, we have a printing press. And until inflation tells us we have to stop using it, and until demand for our bonds goes down, we should be using that printing press and using that demand for our bonds until somebody tells us to stop. And all this austerity talk and fiscal responsibility talk was just the man trying to keep the people down. And that is a debate that happens very much on a generational divide. 35-year-old is willing to entertain the thought I just articulated. You talk to a 60-year-old with a job on Wall Street, and they think that's Satan talking. Satan
talking. Such a beautiful way to end. Quasi-religious, slightly apocalyptic, definitely Gothic, and we're into Gothic.
All right. That's what we're going for. It's been a pleasure talking to you, sir.
Yeah, Rob, we're going for the Gothic look. That's it. We'll talk to you again. Cheers, Valerie.
Cheers.
Yeah, Mako, I never had you down for a goth.
Well, I'm telling you, I'm going to dye my hair jet black. I'm going to wear white makeup. I'm going to listen to The Cult. I'm going to play...
Big eyeliner.
Huge eyeliner.
Big eyeliner.
She sells Sanctuary. I'm going to wear the full Cult sort of look.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to be like one of... Do you know what's a great song? About goths, right? Because goths always affected to be really down and very serious in life. But there's a great song by the Divine Comedy called The Happy Goth. And it's about an upbeat goth who's trying to pretend that she's really down in the world, but deep down, and she goes, and inside, she's a happy goth. So I think for all you goths out there who are really trying to be, negative and depressed and down and serious, listen to the maestro Neil Hannon's Happy Goth, and we'll all feel better. Just before you go, thank you all very much for supporting us on Patreon. And also, if you don't support us on Patreon and you want to learn economics, we have this fantastic new course, which has a video element, it has an audio element, it has all the reading lists, it has notes, it has all sorts of bizarre and unusual takes from the world of economics. It's called International Trade and Money. First 3 lectures are Humanomics, which is about putting humanity back into economics. Second lecture is the trading ape, the idea that we are actually hardwired to trade. And the third is the myth of barter. And of course, this is a 14 lecture series taking us all the way up to crypto. If you want to learn economics, join me on Patreon, patreon.com/David McWilliams.